Ciao amici e benvenuti al terzo episodio di The Antidote, conversazioni che cambiano le menti. La mia ospite di oggi è Sandy J. Swanton, una copywriter professionista e visual storyteller di origine australiana. È un'esperta di comunicazione con più di 25 anni di esperienza internazionale nel project management, nella comunicazione aziendale, nel marketing e nella gestione di eventi. Esperienza che ha maturato in Australia, Canada, Italia e Scozia. Durante la sua carriera estremamente eterogenea e prolifica, ha ricoperto molteplici posizioni nel governo federale australiano, nella città di Vancouver e nella città di Calgary. È stata la coordinatrice delle cerimonie e del catering ai Giochi Olimpici estivi di Sydney 2000 e ha ricevuto un premio dalla città di Vancouver e 3 premi Australia Day per i suoi importanti contributi. Attualmente si trova a Perth, in Scozia, dove tra le altre cose sta esplorando la sua passione per la fotografia applicata alla conservazione della fauna selvatica. Sandy è una persona che ha vissuto la sua vita seguendo i propri sogni e le proprie passioni, girando il mondo, coltivando una carriera molto diversificata e non cedendo mai alla tentazione di prendere la strada più semplice. Per questo motivo la considero una persona da prendere come punto di riferimento e ho la fortuna di poterla chiamare una mentore e cara amica. Spero quindi che troverete la nostra conversazione interessante, stimolante e anche un po' provocatoria. Questo episodio, come tanti dei nostri episodi, sarà in inglese. Credo infatti nel valore di portare ospiti da tutto il mondo per aumentare la quantità e la qualità delle idee e prospettive alle quali siamo esposti. Se ci stai guardando su YouTube, troverai i sottotitoli già inseriti nel video. Se invece ci stai ascoltando su Spotify o altre piattaforme audio, puoi tranquillamente scegliere di ascoltarci in lingua originale o cliccare il link al video YouTube che troverai nella descrizione per guardarci con i sottotitoli. E adesso ecco la mia conversazione con Sandy J. Swanton. Sandy, welcome to the third episode of The Antidote. I am so happy to be here with you and doing this. Needless to say, this episode has been a long time in the making, and I couldn't be here without you because for anybody listening, Sandy has really helped me with branding, with the idea of the podcast, and has just been there holding my hand, I can say, and pushing me forward through every moment. So I'm so grateful, Sandy, for everything you've done. The reason I wanted to talk to you, Sandy, is because, first of all, you are a friend and a mentor. So every time we speak, you kind of turn on the light bulbs in my head, and that's very helpful. But second of all, you've had an extremely prolific career, and I consider you generally a person who has been able to live according to her values and her dreams, which is something that today is extremely rare. So you are a very valuable role model in that sense. So my objective of today was kind of, if we could together dissect a bit your mental frameworks and just what makes you tick as a person. And I think that can help a lot of people. So I hope that's okay with you.
That sounds good.
Fantastic. And I actually wanted to start with your career because I think it's a great overview and example of the person you are. Because you've had an extremely prolific career, you've worked in really high levels of government, not-for-profits, as an entrepreneur today, but also working for big companies in communications. What do you think has, if you can take a step back and just take an overview, right? A bird's eye view of your career. What do you think has made you so successful in so many different things? How can you wear so many hats in your life and wear them well in some way?
I think a couple of things have really helped me through the different aspects of what I like to call a portfolio career. And that is my curiosity and my interest in people. It's what helped me work successfully in nonprofits, because most nonprofits are very grassroots. People are at the center of it. And it doesn't matter what the topic of the nonprofit is, because it's always about how that nonprofit is having a positive impact on people's lives, as a professional communicator, it then becomes my biggest challenge and opportunity to look for how we can talk consistently about the positive impacts the group is making. The same goes for government. Curiosity in people, curiosity in the process, whether it was at a city level or at a federal government level, how do we take that, whatever the project, whatever the program is, how do we take it forward and talk with people rather than at them? And I think their sort of curiosity and interest in people are the two main drivers.
Right. But how do you duplicate curiosity in some way, right? So if the question is, so if you're talking to somebody and you're like, you're curious, and they're like, what does that mean exactly? What do you think? How can you teach curiosity, or can you teach curiosity? Maybe is the question.
I'm not sure it's something you teach. I think it's something that we all have. The block often is fear of consequence. And for a lot of people, that is actively or passively pushed down in them. They're told not to be curious, to follow the path, to conform, to fit into somebody else's box, be it family, school, friends, community. Curiosity is in each of us. And as small children, we are curious, which is how we discover the world. Yeah. It is a choice to understand that there will be consequences. And I would say that there are consequences whether we are curious or not. Not having a plan is a plan. Not being curious is part of your structure.
If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
That's right? Yeah. So choosing to be curious when those around you are trying to encourage you not to, that can feel really uncomfortable. But I would again say that if you choose actively not to, you're actually giving somebody else, even somebody you care about, a lot of power in your life, rather than saying, this is my life and I am curious about X or Y. I'm curious about how the arts have a positive impact in people's lives. I'm curious about how travel will open my eyes to other people. And not so much a quick weekend break. I mean, travel where you go slowly and you experience a culture. I love a weekend getaway, don't get me wrong, but I learn more about a place and myself when I go somewhere for a bit longer and I'm in one place and I'm not trying to tick off somebody else's list. Like, maybe that's the crux of it. It's choosing to have ownership of my life helps build and reinforce curiosity.
Right. Great that we're touching upon these points, because these are part of of your picture that really fascinates me. So I have kind of two follow-up questions, and I'm going to try and wrap my head around them both. Okay. So the first one would be, if you look back at your life, would you have any habits that you've pinpointed in time that you think, oh yeah, that has actually helped me develop my curiosity and stay curious throughout my life?
That one's really easy to answer. I think I was probably 3 or 4. And the question, the word that my father, a lovely, quiet man, a chemical engineer, he was not an extrovert by any stretch. The question, the one word, the one word he constantly commented on that I'd learned that he wished I hadn't. Why? I constantly kept asking, but why, Daddy, why?
Yeah.
And that's where my curiosity really stemmed from. So that constant choice, not to ask why to hurt somebody, but to understand, so that I could interact with them better, not to manipulate, but to understand. Yeah. So.
Right. It's kind of a willingness to uncover the the layers that the world is made of in some way, and asking that why question is like taking a shovel and digging a bit at a time, right?
And sometimes it was a very delicate brush. It was like an archaeologist. Right. Sometimes it's just the little grains of dust that need to be removed, and sometimes, it was a slightly bigger implement. But that notion of curiosity, asking why, and then listening. So for me, curiosity is absolutely connected to listening. And that's choosing to hear what the other person or situation is showing me, knowing that I don't have all the answers. So whether that's a habit or an attitude, I'm not sure, but it's a bit of both. I think it's also a skill set. It's one of those skills I think that has stood me in good stead. I'm not always successful at it. And I try not to paraphrase what people are saying, but listening, choosing to hear what they're saying rather than choosing to listen for when I can speak.
Yeah. Listening is a very underrated and almost forgotten skill these days, where we kind of speak in very short text messages, and we think we already know everything because we can just search it online in some way. And okay, so I'm going to try and stay on track here with my train of thoughts, because every time you touch upon a new thing, I'm like, I would like to ask about that. So we're going to get back to the skills such as listening, but I would like to take a short detour, 1 second, and actually ask you about, touch upon that idea of living according to how you would like to live, right? You said initially, if you're not curious, then you're leaving the decision power in somebody else's hands. The question would be, why did you choose to have a varied career? Why did you choose to walk this different path, right? Because so today, the prospect of having many careers in your lifetime is starting to become the norm. I would say that the route of having a secure job is almost unthinkable today, except in Italy, where people are still living in denial and their parents are still telling their kids, oh, go look for that secure job and try and keep it for the rest of your life. But for most of the world, I would say that we're starting to get out of that kind of frame of mind frame. But when you started in your career, I imagine that it was a very possible and interesting route to follow, the one of having one job, you keep that for your life, especially considering that you were very successful in everything you did. Why not just stay in one thing and do that really well and just do that for the rest of your life? Why so many different hats?
Because of my curiosity.
Right.
There are times, I suspect, certainly my dad and probably other members of the family would say, my curiosity got the better of me.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. I knew that I was a creative personality, and I knew that I wanted to have the expression of creativity in my working life. And my dad didn't understand that at all. So
I imagine as a chemical engineer, it wasn't in his mental habit in some way.
It didn't fit his picture. Right. He was convinced that going to university to get a Bachelor of Arts was actually the only reason I would go was to look for a husband, which he didn't want for me. And I absolutely understand and respect that. It wasn't the reason I wanted to do arts.
Right.
So we had that difference of opinion. And it was in my mid-20s, after my godfather had passed. He didn't have kids, and he left all of his godchildren and their siblings a sum of money. And suddenly I had the ability to say, and it wasn't a large sum, but it was a sum of money. And I found a fabulous private art school in Sydney where I was living that had a great diploma program. And I went, this is really what I want to do. It's my money. It's my life. This is my choice. So part of it is that challenge of understanding at your core who you truly are. What motivates you? What do you enjoy doing? Because doing is something that can be fun. And then what are the pieces of the puzzle you need to get there? So sometimes a formal education is the important piece of the puzzle you need to be able to get into the thing that motivates you. And finding a private art school was useful because it was a really intense program. It was Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. It was like working.
Yeah.
That's really intense when you've still got 3 or 4 hours of homework every night and hours over the weekend. But
you knew that it was a deep dive.
Oh, it was a deep dive
what
indeed.
You liked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the advantage too was being in my mid-20s meant that I was absolutely convinced this is what I wanted to be doing. So I have a lot of respect for people who also, through very reasoned processes, don't go to university straight out of high school. To take time to consider who they are, what they want to be doing. I respect people that know exactly what they want to do when they're 15 and follow that path. So it's about honoring yourself. And for me, a couple of the important pieces through my life have been creativity and travel. Now, I've learned, my mum was English, my dad was Australian, but it turns out through my dad's mum's side, I had a great-great-grandmother who was Scottish. I didn't know that before I landed in Scotland, which is kind of cool. My mum's parents were science university teachers in West Africa for a long time. They loved it there.
Wow.
Part of the reason my mum went to Australia was that she didn't want to be in Africa. She didn't want to be in England, so she went to Australia because it's a long way from both of those when you look at a map.
Yeah.
Travel is a natural part of my family, how we've expressed living. So again, curiosity and my interests sort of started the path. And once I'd started living in Canada, Western Canada for 11 years the first time, it was my home. There were relationships, there were jobs. Some of them were good, some of them were challenging. Some were longer term, some were short. So the mosaic, the portfolio of my career, each time built on interests and skills, and sometimes were choices and sometimes were ended circumstantially. So then it was, what's the next step? So it has had some planning and it's had some reaction and it's had
some serendipity.
Some serendipity, yeah.
How do you know yourself, or how do you get closer to the person you really want to be? How do you start learning what you like in life, what you don't like, things that you find interesting? How do you get closer to yourself in that way? Because that's the only way you can make those choices that say, this is who I am, this is what I want to be.
Yeah. I think I was very, very lucky in that my parents were quite convinced that through our childhood, if we expressed an interest in trying something, there was no judgment. There was opportunity given to us. It wasn't set up as you have to do this for a year if you want to try piano or sport or whatever it was. There was an opportunity. There was certainly times when we were younger, my brother and I were younger, that they would help us with some of the direction. But as we got older, they would sit and talk with us and they would come back to so why do you think you want to do this? That why question kept coming up. And so yes, it was innate in me, but it was also encouraged in conversation. Why do you think this is important? Why does it matter to you? One of my weekend jobs when I was in school and then afterwards was working at an animal rescue shelter. And it was important to me that it was a no-kill shelter. And I respect that there are people who work in situations where they don't have opportunities to not deal with the less comfortable side of animal shelters. This one, it was probably a 20-minute drive from home and beautiful setting on the edge of the bushland in a quiet area of Sydney. And it was just one of the other small threads that ran through my life. working there for 2.5, 3 years part-time, because I found it really life affirming.
Yeah. Do you think for someone that doesn't have the good luck of having parents that allow you to explore who you are, do you have any suggestion on how to get closer to yourself? Anything you should notice? Any I don't know, writing down what you like, writing down what you don't like, anything?
Certainly, I think alone time, and for some people, being alone with themselves that can be intimidating.
Yeah, especially at the start, if you're not used to.
Especially at the start, yeah.
Right.
Yes, writing helps a lot of people, but it's not the thing that helps everybody, certainly not to start with.
Yeah.
Go for a walk, go for a run. I know a lot of people, when they run or even walk now, will listen to a podcast or music. Sometimes not having extra voices running through your head, it really helps.
Yes.
And it can be uncomfortable.
Yep.
And choosing to be in an uncomfortable place, I think is at any age, not just when we're sort of leaving school and trying to work out what we're trying to do. I think at any point there are times that we need to stop, turn off all of the noise, and choose to just be quiet. I've got a friend who's got a favourite park, and she seldom goes there when life's going well, but when it gets uncomfortable, she knows exactly where she's going to go, and she's going to sit there and she's going to walk a couple of different walks in that large park, and she works things out because she cuts out all the background noise.
Yes, I think that's fantastic, because in a world where we are always connected and surrounded by noise constantly, turning off those devices and not having that podcast and not having that music is a very difficult choice sometimes. And if you're not used to being alone, it can be, like you said, quite uncomfortable. But I find with time, you start noticing that you're actually a dialogue partner with yourself. It's not just one voice, right? It's more than one voice. You're kind of discussing with yourself, saying, no, I don't really want this. Then there's another side of you says, but it could be a good idea. Or you start understanding where you have some insecurities, and you can really start learning how to bargain with yourself. And sometimes, I don't want to do this, but I promise you, if you do this, then you're going to get some benefits. So let's try, right? You start having these kind of interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think that notion of trying is something that it's not lost, but it's been misplaced. It's been put aside. I've got a number of acquaintances in Western Canada who, through their lives, were told that unless you can do something perfectly, don't bother.
Don't bother. Yeah.
Well, the silly thing is, we don't learn to talk or walk or eat without making an awful lot of mess to start with.
Yes.
Human beings.
Nothing in nature works well at the first time, right? It's trial and error.
Forget well, perfectly. I mean, it's completely nonsensical notion. Well would be nice. It's that starting and giving it a go. And there's only one way to work out if you want to persevere and learn something, and that's to start. So, going into a career in a creative space, I originally started in visual communications in graphic design, and as much as I love it, what I found was that I love working with words so much more. And I wasn't always good at it, and I still occasionally have bad moments, but words to me, working in a creative space, is where I feel
engaged.
It's a really interesting combination. I feel absolutely calm and fully engaged.
Yeah.
And it's
so you get that best of both worlds.
Yeah. And it's in being quiet and choosing to be in the uncomfortable spaces, to ask myself the question, do I like this? Why? Why do I want to try it? That I have discovered that really interesting space of being really comfortable and at ease, and really challenged and alive and energized and just loving what I'm doing. And you wouldn't necessarily put them together, but when you're in that space, When I'm in that space, I lose track of time. It's the same thing when I pick up a camera. If I'm in that headspace, I have no idea if I've been there for 2 hours or 2 minutes.
I think that's generally in life, that's generally an indication of being in the place you're supposed to be when you lose track of time.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing I find is that there are times that those questions in the quiet space are literally banging around my head, bumping into each other, and that starts to drive me insane. So as most people who know me know quite well, one of my favorite things to do is to use Post-it notes. And I'll use different colored pens and different colored pads and different sizes.
That's a habit you've given me as well.
What I've found is by getting ideas out of my head and looking at them, by engaging a different sense, using my eyes, suddenly I literally see things differently. And it also calms the noise in my head. And I figure that's always a good thing.
Yeah. When you taught me to use the Post-it method, which is, just to explain, it's just basically writing your thoughts as they come down on Post-its. So you empty your mind and you have them right there in front of me. I was so curious because I found so many benefits. I was finally sleeping again after having so many thoughts always at night coming out just because I wasn't dealing with them. That I actually did some research to find if there was any scientific work done on writing and kind of these calming effects of writing, and there's actually so much on it. The idea behind it is that when you write, you're actually allowing your mind not to use that processing power to remember the thing, the thought. So keep it in your short-term memory. It's writing it down. So now it can use all its energy just to analyze that thought. It doesn't have to remember it anymore. So it just has a calming effect where you have a thought. It's not abstract anymore. It's concrete. It's bounded. You can look at it. You can be aware about it, and it's life changing for people who deal with a lot of thoughts, are very creative, and their mind is always going. And sometimes too many ideas start banging around, and you can't really focus on anything.
One of the other things I love about that as a process is the idea of doing a brain dump acknowledges that they're just ideas. And it's not until you look at them that you can work out if it's one you want to pursue, you want to unpack or not. And like most things, acknowledging something is halfway to working out if it's the right fit or not. It's the same thing with our fears. So many people have fears about trying something new. What if I can't do it well? What if it doesn't fit? What am I going to lose out on? All of the what ifs, which are fear-based. But when we acknowledge our fear and name it and recognize it then loses a lot of its power and never keeps coming up. You're like, no, hang on. This is not your decision, fear. You can just take a seat in the corner. You don't get a seat at the big table. This is where I'm doing the work. I see you.
Yes.
It's the same with ideas. So there are no bad ideas until they've been processed. An idea
and
is
you
an
are
idea.
not your ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Not your ideas and not your fears.
Yes. I've had so many shitty ideas in my life, like anyone, right, who works with ideas, that writing them down and putting them aside are like, okay, this is a good idea. This is a bad idea. Let's just put them there and see what works and what doesn't, right?
And sometimes it's not the idea itself that's not right. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's an idea that's like 5 steps down the road and you've actually got to do the work to even give that other idea a place, a space to find out if it could work.
Yes. And it's the same thing with fears, right? Sometimes you have a project you want to start and you fear the consequence of something that could happen 5 years down the line if you're successful. You're like, okay, let's get there. Let's get there and worry when it's the right time. Right?
It's also knowing that whether it's 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years down the road, that this thing you fear may or may not happen. The reality is, at that point, you're going to be in a better situation because you started the journey.
Yes.
And that
definitely.
Can be intimidating. That can be one of the biggest challenges when you're doing something that sits uncomfortably with people who've known you for a period of time. because so many of them care so much. They don't want to see you fail. The trouble is, failing is actually when we learn. They don't want to see you hurt. Again, it's often in places of hurt that we learn more about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And while their intentions are incredibly generous and wonderful, we're not babies, and we don't live in a world of cotton wool. And that occasionally we've got to stumble a little bit and scrape a knee to work out that we actually like this and we're going to persevere, or no, that's not the right fit.
Yes, and I think just the realization that although your family and friends love you to death and they want to help you with their suggestions, their protection is something that is going to damage you in the long run if it's constant and if it doesn't allow you to actually deal with the lessons that life wants to teach you in some way. Right? You just need to get out there.
One of the things I have so much respect for my mum. She was one of my heroes. One of the things she often said was that she worked out from an early age that I probably wasn't going to pursue an easy life, but she knew absolutely to her core that it would be interesting and rewarding. Now, it's not to say that I think people can't have what might be seen as an easy life that isn't interesting, but I think when we constantly choose the easy way out of things, when we choose not to process hurt, when we choose not to step into something new, that we're actually that it's usually fear, our fear or somebody else's fear, that's going to limit us. And the confrontation is choosing to step into something new, knowing you can't do it perfectly. You don't have all the answers.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the challenge comes, sometimes with ourselves, but certainly with those around us.
Would you mind going a bit deeper in what you mean with not an easy life?
I have many family, friends, former colleagues who you look at their lives, and yes, we all have challenges, but they would often say, "Oh, you're so brave for choosing to live somewhere else, for choosing to change jobs, for whatever the thing was."
Yep.
Brave, I don't see myself as having been brave in most of those situations. I have often found the challenge of choosing not to move, be it job or city, that has been a greater negative than stepping into the unknown. And I think this notion of unknown and change in many ways have been poorly packaged. Change is inevitable. Change. If you're not changing, you're not alive.
Change needs a better sales director.
Yeah, it does indeed.
Right.
Because if we never changed, we'd still all be in diapers drinking out of sippy cups. And we're not. Thank goodness we're not.
We're not.
We're not at all. So change is inevitable. The difference is if we don't understand ourselves, if we're not prepared to ask questions of why and be a little uncomfortable, change, particularly change that is put onto us, change in a work situation, change in a relationship, they can become overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I see a number of people who've stayed in bad marriages because it was easier than the process of going through the pain.
Yes. Tim Ferriss has a wonderful quote. He says people prefer discomfort to uncertainty. So they prefer discomfort to uncertainty. They prefer staying in a place where they know that it's uncomfortable, but it's a certainty of being uncomfortable than the uncertainty of taking a choice maybe you will feel better in the long run, but maybe in the short term you're going to be worse, and that keeps them paralyzed.
Yeah, there are some really interesting studies that have been done around the idea of our needs and our values and how they work together, and how which one has priority, and that usually our needs will override our values,
trump our values.
Absolutely. Well, it means it's important to understand your values, but if you don't understand your needs, and we have a need as human beings for certainty and uncertainty.
Yes.
Uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing. Certainty can also be a bad thing, as you were just describing. So for me, choosing to not only have an easy life, again, it comes back to my curiosity, because by being curious and choosing to stay curious about the world, choosing to be interested in people and places and how I can have a positive impact through friendships, through the work I do. Again, we keep talking about choices.
Right.
Which leads back to values and our needs. So it is all connected, but it's it's interesting to sort of try and just follow a stream.
I'd like to jump back a bit and go back to the skill sets you were talking about earlier, because I was very curious and I wanted to ask you what you think are, apart from listening, so we already have one, what are the skills that have given you the best returns over time? So the skills that have landed you the best jobs, the skills that have given you the most success at those jobs, right? What are some skills that you're like, oh, I'm really glad I invested in learning this?
I think one of the skills that I'm most thankful that I learned is, and it goes with listening, is how to use vocabulary to demonstrate that I've supported somebody, that I've heard them. The choice of words we use about ourselves, about a situation, about a project, a program, a house we're interested in, a relationship we'd like. When the language is inclusive, what we suddenly do to those we speak with about it is we demonstrate that we don't want to be isolated and we don't want to be an island. And most of us have at least a subconscious framework of understanding that community and communication are how we function. So listening and vocabulary, being comfortable hearing my own voice, understanding that just about everybody is uncomfortable speaking in public, and that's okay, but choosing to do it anyway.
Yes. And understanding that the only way you're going to actually become better at it is if you actually do it.
Practice.
Right?
But I think that it's not so much about a particular skill set, I think, that has helped me. It's the framework you mentioned right at the beginning. So it's the framework of choosing to try, the framework of choosing to listen, the framework of choosing to pay attention.
Yeah.
Those aspects of it, rather than saying, yes, it's the fact that I know how to touch type. That's a skill. It's useful because I can type faster. It gets interesting when you change. It's a tool, but it gets interesting when you change countries and the keyboard's different.
Yes, definitely. It takes a lot of time to get used to.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's the mindset that is strongest. I know Simon Sinek talks about this difference we talk about with hard skills and soft skills, and how much he really hates the phrase soft skills. I would agree. These are the skills that I value, are the ones that are integral. They are who I am. They are how I move from place to place, be that getting up in the morning and going to work, or be that moving from Australia to Canada, to Italy, to the UK.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If I can just touch upon that 1 second. When you mean soft skills, I think the notion is it's a nice to have, right? But what you're saying is no, these things are essential.
Yeah.
They're a building block for a successful career, but also a well-lived life, from what you're saying,
so.
right?
And picking up what you were saying earlier about career paths, growing up in Australia, certainly the idea was nominally you would work potentially in a couple of different places. It wasn't so much the differentiation between job and career, but it was understood that probably you'd work in a couple of different places as opposed to one, under one business banner.
Yes.
Living in Canada, it became really clear really, really quickly that most people there were going to have 2 or 3 or 5 careers in their lives. So
Canada was already much more fast-paced than Australia.
And in Canada, it was probably 2 to 3. The notion was that in the US it was 5. You know, inside a handful was considered normal in North America. By the time I got back to Australia, that conversation was happening in Australia. So it had, in that period, that decade, it had
caught up.
I don't know about caught up, but it had moved forward. And so living in Italy, it was quite fascinating because as an English teacher, particularly business English teacher, I was working with people who had followed that one pathway, go get a job at a bank, an insurance company, very particular.
Yes.
And in working with them, a lot of them were taking English to improve their job prospects inside the organization. But some of them were going, this is not going to fit anymore. I want to do English because I'm finding my wings are stretching and I want to fly. I want to stretch my wings and fly. So for them, they went through the uncomfortable process of learning another language trying to get to quite a high level because they wanted to step into the uncertainty. So I found that very rewarding as a teacher and as a person because of helping somebody navigate change.
Yeah.
Which I think is a skill we all need. That to me is one of those soft skills that is often put aside. We need to find a way in ourselves to understand how to process change because it happens to all of us. Change is one of the constants of life.
Yes. Do you think people should start thinking about their career differently, right? So you were teaching English to people who I imagine in their midlife or later on in their life were starting to spread their wings. 70% of Italians don't like their job, statistically. I know the statistics in the US are very similar. I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but I can imagine that a lot of people don't like their job. For young people that are just moving into the work environment and just thinking of starting a career, do you think they should bite the bullet for 40 years and just work hard until retirement where they can finally find themselves? Or do you think there's a different way?
I know there's a different way. And I think the increase globally of online access demonstrates that in spades. 10 years ago when I was working at the City of Calgary, we were talking more about how do we effectively restructure society so that people don't have to work in the office Monday to Friday. How do we as a society set up the framework that acknowledges that working from home at least part-time offers opportunities that simply aren't possible when the requirement is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
Wow.
So
you guys were having these conversations in Canada 10 years ago, and here in Italy, there's been like a law that says people have to go back to the office now.
Yeah. There are some structural pieces that are really complicated to move.
Right.
And when a company or a country for business is set up on hierarchy, it is really hard to move that dial. Not impossible.
Yes.
It's a choice. It's a choice. And a lot of people's egos are tied up in that hierarchy.
Yeah. Especially because hard hierarchy needs the people that are in the hierarchy to be right there, because the presumption is as soon as that you stop looking at them. So if they're working at home, they're going to start
goofing
obeying you, you know? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
And yet when we go to university, no matter where we are on the planet, when we go to university, our lecturers aren't there the whole time. Our professors aren't over our shoulders the whole time. University graduates have learned how to manage and monitor their work process. So it's quite interesting that in Italy, at least, there is this enormous graduate process that is really heavy. The workload is enormous. Then there's the 1 to 2 years potentially of an internship that is overbearing.
Yes.
And then the work environment is so regimented and structured. And it's, yes, fear is the driver for so much of that, of those other authority levels in the business. And I think that the number of successful online businesses with teams working remotely, even before the beginning of 2020, that change, that dramatic, radical change keeps demonstrating that there are different options. Now, clearly there are challenges for surgeons to not physically be in the same room as a patient.
Of course.
But we buy food, we buy clothing, we buy cars online, and you're not physically in that same space as that product. So I think the world has definitely shifted. I think the last 2 years have demonstrated that a lot of people are starting to understand that while, again, it might be a little uncomfortable, there's opportunities that are different.
Yes. So for that young person that doesn't really want to be stuck in traffic for the next 40 years, going to an office and a job that they don't necessarily like, because at the end of the day, that's the point, right? So if you're going to a job that just turns you on and makes you feel happy, then traffic is just maybe an unpleasant byproduct of doing something you love, or maybe it's just a moment for you to rethink the fantastic day you have. But if you're going to a job that just makes you feel really tired and unmotivated, where should they start to start thinking about different options? I know curiosity is one of the points for sure.
I also think there's that small piece that says none of us are going to love what we do 100% of the time.
Yes.
So
totally agree.
If you're having a bad day or a bad week, put it in context of it's a project that's simply got to be delivered. Yes. So let's just get on and deliver it. For me, I sort of use as a guideline, if I'm enjoying my job at least 60% of the time, it's worth hanging in there. And most of the time I enjoy it more than that. But when it consistently gets that more than 40% of what I do is really starting to hurt me. And I mean, not just stuck in traffic. I mean that I'm really starting to struggle.
And it's starting to trickle in other parts of your life as well. It
seeps into everything else.
Yeah.
Exhausted, bad moods, really uncomfortable. The first step is to actually understand, where are your parameters? What am I prepared to put up with? What are my goals? If my goal is that I want to leave my job and I want to go traveling for a year next year, then putting up with a job that pays well right now to cover the bills, to do the savings.
It's an end to the means.
So what are my goals? Honestly, what are my goals?
Right.
And if paying off a mortgage is the most important thing for you in your relationship, it's part of the deal you have with your partner, then honest conversations, when you've both had some sleep, are important. To sit down and go, okay, is this working? I'm aware that I'm uncomfortable. I'm unpleasant to be around. Can we have a conversation about how we do this together? And I think that's part of the biggest part of the challenge is understanding where are the boundaries for you to have that conversation. Negotiate with yourself, negotiate with a partner, negotiate with work. Unless you know who you are, so again, it comes back to just taking some time to learn to be comfortable in your skin and to work out where you get what makes you uncomfortable. That's sort of the biggest part. And yes, part of it is it takes time as we live life. And it's not always easy for somebody in their late teens, early 20s. They say that the period of time where we have the most change in our lives is between 18 and 25.
Yeah.
So part of what happens in that time is you are going to be uncomfortable in your skin because you're going from being a kid at school into
being a functioning adult.
Hopefully. Finding what works for you, at least in your 20s as an adult. And it just, so part of it is taking that time, but it's choosing to ask potentially uncomfortable questions and then listening.
Yeah, and that's a great point because just knowing that fact allows you in some way to embrace the change as it happens, right? Because if you don't know it, you second guess yourself, what's happening? Oh my God, why is all this happening? But if you understand that it's part of the natural process of growing up, maturing, understanding who you are and getting closer to yourself, and the change and the discomfort is just a feature of the process, then you can breathe and you just go through it.
I think one of the important things is that word we used earlier, perfect. Take a hold of it and toss it out the window. Just
toss it out the window.
And I know friends who, for whatever that thing has become, sometimes it's perfection. Sometimes it's fear. What they will do, it's not toss it out the window and litter, but they will actually write it onto paper. And when they can, they will physically burn it.
Yeah. Ooh, I like it.
So
spicy.
Very, very, it's visual,
physical.
It's visceral, it's an incredible release.
Wow.
It's an acknowledgement.
So take whatever is bothering you in the moment, write it down, and burn it or rip it up or ritualistically discard it. Yeah. Wow.
It can be a really moving thing. And it doesn't work for everybody, but if it's it's another way to help you move past something that might be blocking you. And yes, the acknowledgement that life changes and that up till sort of mid-20s, I say 25, mid-20s, it's that understanding that, there are going to be some bad days in here, and that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah. Looking back at your career still, what would you consider some of the best moments, some of the highlights of your career?
Delivering projects, and it's the celebration with the people, the team that delivered projects. So on completely different levels. Some of the big projects that we delivered in the Australian government were mind-boggling. Be it we did a very small team, and I was the event coordinator, event manager with the Federal Minister's Office. We did 31 events in 6 weeks.
Wow.
In regional Australia.
Okay. Can you describe regional Australia for people who don't know?
It's the size of Europe.
Okay.
Australia is close, similar landmass to Europe, and
with more kangaroos than people.
With a lot more kangaroos. So
correct?
there's 25 million people there. So traveling to regional Australia is usually a very long haul. Well, a long flight. It's 5 hours from Sydney to Perth. And then getting that's on a big plane, and then getting on a small one. And that might be a 10-seater. So it goes a lot slower.
Yeah.
and then traveling maybe for another 2, 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
And you get to where you need to be for the following morning and discover that your accommodation is a caravan. And that's the hotel. That's the hotel.
That's the hotel.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the choice of dinner is a steak, a hamburger, and a salad. And it's not a fresh salad.
No.
There's a lot of beer, and just it's I love regional Australia. It's a remarkable place. But when you're used to the density of population in North America or in
Sydney
or Europe or even in Sydney, Sydney's 5 million, 5.5 million. When you're used to the density of populations almost anywhere in Europe and how easy it is, the notion of travel in Australia to regional and rural Australia is remarkable. It's
almost unthinkable. Yeah,
because there's just nobody there.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was sort of one aspect, but it was a celebration with the team, and some of those people I worked with, even some of the external contractors, are still friends more than a decade later because of the bonds we built in that time.
Yeah, because you were in those same 10-seater planes together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Holding on for dear life.
Thankfully, the pilots were great, but some interesting ones. Completely different aspect of delivering the catering side for Sydney Olympics. All of the I was the catering manager for special events, which might have been a birthday cake or a barbecue for the Australian squad or a 20 minutes notice, afternoon tea.
I can't imagine the pressure.
Yeah, they were long days.
Working for catering for the Summer Olympics. Yeah. That's a lot of pressure, I can imagine.
And we were inside the Olympic Village. So that was the very contained world. 15,000 of the world's leading athletes and their coaches, which meant that, the pressure on the food and the delivery and the timing was intense.
Intense. Yeah.
Getting a phone call from the officials that Nelson Mandela was going to come in and visit the South African team, and we had 20 minutes notice to put on afternoon tea. Wow. So enormous emotion and huge stress, tight timeline, and you just have to do it. There isn't a choice of, I'd like to ponder the menu for the next 2 days. No, you've got 2 seconds. What have we got? What can we do now? Get it done, get it delivered. So the feeling of success after those. They're very, very big things. I mean, they're almost surreal to talk about, but the feeling of success is just as strong from working at a non-profit when there were 5 of us delivering the marketing for the city of Victoria, downtown 44 city blocks. And we won the provincial award for the program. But it wasn't the award that made it. It was the team and the impact on people's lives.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's the people that stay in your head and in your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other things look great in a CV, and that's nice, but it's the people that make the difference.
And just flipping the coin, what are some of the most important or biggest mistakes, I would say, but maybe in the context of what have they taught you the most? So some of the most important failures of your work life, and what have they helped you become as a person?
Inevitably, it was when I didn't listen to my gut, when I didn't trust that I actually knew myself well enough to go, this doesn't sit well. So, and it didn't matter on the situation. There was one place in Vancouver, and I only worked there a week because I worked out quite quickly on that second Monday morning of going to work that I actually felt physically ill the closer I got. I felt sicker and sicker, and I just went, this is not a good situation.
Not the right place. Yeah.
And it was before we had cell phones. So I turned around, put the bus home, rang the office and said, I'm sorry, I'm unwell. I've tried to get into work, but I'm not well. Slept for a day, woke up the next morning and just knew on my gut that I needed to resign.
Wow.
It was really strong, really
Yeah.
strong. And the lesson is when we know ourselves, we can pay attention. And it's a choice, choosing to pay attention. What is physically hurting us? I had, after 12 years of working in and around government communications, in a lobby group in federal government in Australia and in cities, city governments in Canada. After 12 years, I got to the point of going, this is starting to physically hurt me. The hours were excessive.
Yes.
I need to change things and use the fabulous Post-its to work out what were the options, because I literally couldn't think straight. I was working 60 hours a week regularly and just went, this is starting to be a major problem. Again, it was that 40% was so far behind where I was not happy. We were delivering some great projects, but the rest of the package was just exhausting. It was starting to physically impact my life. And I remember sort of working through the notions of different options. And I took 6 weeks with Post-it notes to work through the various options.
Right. It's not something you do one day.
No, not when it's a really big thing. No, I take the time.
Right.
If I have the chance, I take the time. And I remember walking into my doctor's surgery because we'd been dealing with the stress levels. And I walked in, I said, I think I've found the solution. And she asked me what it was. And I said, I think I'm moving to Italy to go teach English. And the whole face lit up and said, can I come with you?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how we met, I think, 2 years later.
Yeah, a couple of years after that. So that understanding, the lessons for me are, the mistake was sometimes taking a job that just wasn't the right fit. That was certainly that situation in Vancouver. Just when I'd been in the interview, I hadn't paid enough attention to the vibe in the
signs,
the vibe in the building. To trust my gut.
Yeah. Maybe it's one of those feelings you just have, but you kind of ignore in the moment because the perks of the job are interesting, right?
You start with a simple one, a paycheck. And yes, it's important.
Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough.
And there are times when there aren't many jobs around, and I absolutely respect that we need the need. It's not something I take lightly, but I also don't take my health lightly. And when I'm physically getting ill, this is not good.
Yes. Yeah. Just to put the choice you made in perspective, you had a very well-paying career, and you decided to leave it all and to move to Italy, which is not the place you usually go to earn money.
I didn't go to earn money. That wasn't the primary reason I went. I went with the understanding that I needed to completely shake my life up, because I had been living in a world, working in a world where other people's agendas, egos, and timing had driven mine. So I had absolutely no space to be creative, to follow any of my interests, to have time with friends. I could turn my personal phone off, but we were strongly encouraged never to turn the work one off. Now, my work phone was the first thing I checked at 6:15 when my alarm went off, and it was the last thing I looked at 11 o'clock at night. I did. Again, I didn't come to that decision lightly, but it was the creativity, history, beauty, food, wine, places of Italy, the chaos, in fact. Yeah. The chaos of Italy was the antidote to everything else I'd been doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about a call to adventure, right? Saying, I'm going to take that step.
The summer before I moved to Italy, I'd made the decision, and the timing was with work and with everything else, that I would move a number of months later. And my mum came to visit from Australia to Western Canada, and I took her on a cruise to Alaska. And it turned out to be one of the most rewarding things I'd ever done, because she had never mentioned some of her childhood dreams of seeing whales feeding in the wild, of seeing eagles in the wild. And she literally was like a kid in a candy store her eyes just constantly lit up. It was the best thing.
Lit up.
And there was one of the tours we did, there was this beautiful bald eagle who'd been standing on a branch, top of the tree, a scraggy, dead branch, and it literally just opened its wings and stepped off.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, as I watched it come down,
Wow.
it spread its wings even more and it flew. And that to me was, really poignant. Stepping off the edge of something, there's going to be a bit of fall. But that isn't the worst thing that's going to happen to me.
Yes.
Choosing to take a chance even in uncertainty.
Yeah.
That was one of those life skills that I've had the chance to nurture.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, to start wrapping this up, I still have a couple of questions for you. One is, to that 20-year-old out there who is listening to us, maybe a bit lost in life, maybe not knowing what he or she wants to do, what would you say? How would you comfort them? How would you give a suggestion on what to do next?
I do encourage them to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to choose to ask, what do I like? What do I like doing? And what do I not want to do? Sometimes the what do I not want to do is an easier place to start. And whether it's writing it in a journal or on Post-its or making mental notes, putting them on your phone, start to work out what makes you sing and dance and what really doesn't. Start to separate those things.
Yeah.
And as you start down that path, what happens is one idea springboards to another. So understand this process of living, of being. It's not something you have to answer in your 20s. And certainly you don't have to have all the answers by the time you're 30. Because the questions I ask myself now, while they might have a similar base, how I will answer them is quite different now than I would have when I was 20. And that's okay. And not only okay, that's good.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have to decide what you're going to do for the next 60 years of your life. You just have to work out what you're going to do for the next year or two. And if becoming a doctor is the thing you absolutely want to do, then understand the path that that's going to take. And that there are no shortcuts, but that's the path you're going to take. If you want to become a dog groomer, it's a very different path to a doctor, but if you absolutely love animals, or a veterinary nurse, or a dentist, or an artist, by choosing to be in that uncomfortable space of working out what you like and what you don't like, I think that's the best place to start.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another question is there any book that you've gifted often in your life and that you think people should read?
I'm not even sure if it's still in print. It's one of my favorite books is called A House Somewhere, and it is excerpts from wonderful writers of time they've spent in other places. So it's one of the things I truly love about it is these are people who come from enormously different backgrounds. And they talk about their experience of being in another place, of that place, of how it impacted them, what they learned about themselves, what they learned about that place. And for me, it was an absolute affirmation that we don't have all the answers, that places have different impacts on us, and that both of those are really important things, that no one place has it all, that every place will teach us something and we will be able to give something of ourselves to that place. that connectedness is one of the things that I love about it. And in a number of the stories, people are in really uncomfortable situations.
Do you think there is a secret to living a purposeful life?
It's choosing to live, as opposed to just sort of stumble along. The people I have the greatest respect for, some of whom I have met, some of whom I haven't, are those who have decided that stumbling along, following what is normal, whatever that is, people who are choosing to step aside from the usual path, they're the ones who are the most satisfied. They are they're not the most challenged, because we all have challenges. They're the ones whose stories resonate. And I know they probably terrify a lot of people, but the people I'm drawn to, and for myself, it's those who are choosing to not just conform. There's two parts to it. A successful life is understanding for yourself what success means. And for a lot of people, it might be a home and a bank balance. It isn't for me. And I know some people find that quite confrontational. Success for me is the relationships, the connections, the experiences. So when I've got that in context, choosing to live, choosing to step into some uncomfortable places. Moving to Italy, I didn't know anybody or the language. But that it's okay to choose some pieces of comfort. So I now live in Scotland because with my British passport, I can legally be here and I don't have to deal with the bureaucratic process. And it's okay. But the time, where I was at, to step into a place of I needed the chaos and the creativity and the beauty that Italy was. It was the right step.
What's next in your life, Sandy? So
3 weeks ago, I started a fabulous new part-time position. It's new to the organisation, a non-profit in the arts space. It's an arts centre, regional arts centre here in Scotland, as their communications and marketing manager. So we're in the process of building the capacity and the team. We're looking at, with the changes of the last couple of years, how to structure the business, and then how, because it is primarily a community-based, community-focused group, how do we honour that while still developing and maintaining a healthy cash flow for the business to be able to support community? So there's some really interesting challenges, but really lovely team of people. So it makes a world of difference. The other things I'm doing are working as a professional copywriter and also building my skills and my portfolio in conservation photography, visual storytelling. Storytelling to me is a thing I love, whether it's in words or images or the combination, because each of us have stories, our places, the people we meet, the ideas we have. It's about storytelling, and that touches lives. It touches our own lives. It touches those we love. It touches broader communities.
Yeah, storytelling is actually one of the topics I knew I wanted to talk to you about, but I made a conscious choice to leave it out today of the conversation because I wanted to dedicate a whole other episode to it. And so it's going to be an excuse to have you on again in the future, where we'll just focus much more on storytelling and all its aspects. And finally, where can people find you if they're curious, if they want to reach out?
So for writing, I use my name, sandyjswanton.com. It's a nice little website. There's emails on there. You can get in touch. For the other sides of my work, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest, Global Wanderings. I am thoroughly enjoying how people are responding to my photographs and choosing to bring a piece of what I've seen in the quiet corners of the world that I've been privileged to go to have a quiet corner shared in their world is lovely. Yeah.
Yes, and every time I look at your photos, I feel like I'm there with you. So that is a very
that means a lot.
Important piece, I find. Sandy, thank you. Thank you so much. I really thank you so much for helping me with setting up this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. But most importantly, thank you for being a friend and a mentor for all these years. I couldn't be half the person I am without you. So I am extremely grateful for everything you've done. And I hope to have you on again soon because we still have a lot to talk about. And I find our conversations could go on for hours. So
that sounds great.
It's definitely worth another go. And have a great day. As we say in Italy, ciao.
Bye.
Ciao amici e grazie per aver ascoltato questo episodio fino in fondo. Spero che questa conversazione vi abbia cambiato un po' la mente. Se queste conversazioni vi piacciono, ricordatevi di cliccare qua per iscrivervi al canale. Ricordatevi anche di condividere questo episodio con i vostri amici. Ci aiuterete a far crescere il podcast e realizzare la nostra missione di diffondere conversazioni che cambiano le menti. Grazie. Ci vediamo alla prossima.